Wes, in your fascinating career as part of the COINTEL, an interesting thing cropped up, and I'm just wondering and relating it to today's and the Homeland Security that's enveloped us post 9/11. There was something called a security index and a reserve index. The terms made up of a number of thousands and thousands of names. Was that collected names through COINTELPRO for potential subversives? Does those ring a bell? Security index and reserve index.
Yes, the security index was originally an index of members of the Communist Party,
Okay.
and then we began to include the Socialist Workers' Party and other organizations that Hoover and his associates thought that should be included. And at one point, I estimated that nationwide we probably got pretty close to 500,000 names. And theoretically, that was a good idea during the Cold War. Because a lot of people don't realize that we were about that far away from World War III. And we had regular lectures in the Chicago office, and I presume in other offices too.
Now, when you say that far away, give me an example of what leads you to say that. Was it a scare tactic, or do you think that we were, there were missiles ready to be fired, and that's what you were told at any minute?
We were told that there was a missile war going on, in addition to what you read in the newspaper, but we had informants one informant who was a double agent. He was working for the KGB and for the FBI both, but he was more on our side than on their side. And the war of missiles, the buildup, got to the point in the mid-50s and early 60s that whoever starts first is going to win.
Yeah.
And so what the FBI was doing was trying to get the names of as many people who would be anti-American on the list. And it was a fabulous program in case there was a national emergency, that it was formed that there were certain cards. There were probably 5x8 cards with little tabs on them, and the most important people had a certain color, and a second level and third level. And it was set up so that an agent would be given one or two cards, and then we would be assigned 2 or 3 police officers to go out and arrest that person. And then theoretically, we're going to take them all over to Soldier Field. That's the only place you could put 50,000 people in a national emergency. Fortunately, that never happened, because I don't know what you talk about chaos. That would have been unbelievable. But that was the program, and
In the planning.
that was the planning of the security index. Then, when there was an inquiry by Congress into the security index, that was kept secret from the Attorney General, President, everybody. No one outside the FBI knew about the security index.
CIA wouldn't have known. You don't?
Oh
think?
no, we wouldn't have given them time of day about the security index. Now, that doesn't mean that some friendly agent who might have been a friend of the CIA would tell him about it, but he's risking his job if he did. And I don't know that agents on the bank robbery squad would even know what we were doing. It was that secret.
Yeah.
I mean, it was hush-hush. Now, when Congress began to look in it, somehow they heard about the security index. And this was when the Church Committee was criticizing the FBI for doing this and doing that.
Yeah.
And the FBI must have let it slip. And then the Church Committee thought, you've got how many thousands on the security index? So then we went to the reserve index, and cut that down. And then there was one other index. We cut it way down. The only thing was that we didn't get rid of the security index cards.
Right.
If we had security index over here and we're theoretically supposed to destroy them, we moved them over here. Now they're no longer in the security index or the reserve index, but we still have the index.
Right.
Now, if we still have a national emergency, if Soviet Union dropped a bomb on Chicago or Dallas or wherever, we still have all these names that we can go arrest people.
Yeah.
And
now the reason why I asked that also, Wes, is because during the time period, say from the early 60s or when the time from when Kennedy came in, would these indexes or those types of indexes exist at that time period, 60, 61, 62, 63?
Mm-hmm.
They would exist. And because wouldn't somebody like Oswald be on one of those, potentially on one of those security?
He should have. And I don't know.
I mean, are there records of this, or are there archival materials on these names?
The only reasonable theory I can come up with was that Dallas may have been more of a criminal office. Now they're criminal offices, and then they're offices, security offices like New York, Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, where they had large manufacturing and unions. Not that they were the problem, but that's where the communists wanted to circulate.
Right. And he's a defector.
Well, this is
Right.
This is the whole thing, Wes. If Oswald, whether it was on the false defector program or he was a legitimate defector, regardless, when he came back, he would have been likely on one of these, lists just as a defector on that level.
I think so, because I was working the Fair Play for Cuba Committee in Chicago, and there were some that I think qualified for the security index, but then the security index became a victim of bureaucracy, and when the bureaucrats wrote up the guidelines for the security index, they were thinking of members of the Communist Party. Now there are people out there that should be on it, but the manual talks about the Communist Party, and you have to be this, this, and this, and this, and this. Okay, now you can be on the security index. But how about these crazy people out here? Well, they don't qualify. They might qualify for a mental institution, but not for the security index. Now, if they're a member of the Communist Party, you move them right over.
Yeah.
Nothing flat.
What would happen, Wes, is that if a name came up, was going to be put on the security index, when they checked the name, they found out they were an FBI informant. Could they still end up on the security index or not if they were an FBI informant? Or because it wouldn't be blowing their cover, would it? Because that index wouldn't get out. So I'm trying to determine whether they would still put it on anyways.
I don't think they were. We had safeguards so that we could protect the informants. And one I think of was Morris Childs, who was probably the most important informant the FBI ever had in the whole history. I never saw his name on a security index. I saw a lot of names, but I just don't think he would be in there because he was so high up and he was so well protected that when I was in Chicago and we were on surveillances of somebody like Claude Lightfoot and Morris Childs is going to meet Claude Lightfoot, they'd call us over the radio and say, drop the surveillance of Claude Lightfoot. The first time I heard that, I thought, why?
So would you say all FBI field offices had these indexes? Would that be a fair statement?
No, I'd say maybe a dozen.
Would you say New Orleans area, Dallas, and New York City? Would they have any of these indexes, those three areas?
Well,
I'm just trying to pin down Oswald's name if it could crop up in any of these indexes in those regions, because that's where he.
I don't think there's anything in New Orleans. Of course, I may not know about it, but I don't think there's enough to qualify. For instance, in order to give you an example, when I moved from Chicago to Louisville, there were 2 agents who worked security cases. In Chicago, we had about 150.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this then, Wes, because if you're familiar...
I think there were 2 people on the security index in Louisville.
Okay, but I'm just thinking, because you're familiar with Guy Bannister, who was FBI, if he's got his show running down right in the center of New Orleans...
He was agent in charge in
and
Chicago.
And if the FPCC is right around the corner, as you know, in the same building... community, that you were looking into, did any of your friends relate any in the field, in any of these Dallas field offices or New Orleans field office, relay any information about who Oswald was in these? I mean, wouldn't that have piqued someone's interest, saying, oh, I wonder if Oswald's on a security index, and had a look up? I mean, did you ever come across any of that or hear any
It should have piqued the interest of the field office in particular.
Yeah. Like Dallas and New Orleans.
Well, I don't know New Orleans so much, but when wasn't it in Dallas when Oswald took a shot at, was it General Walker?
Yeah.
To me, that would have been enough to put him on the security index.
But the fact that he had this FPCC office in the center of, in Guy Bannister's office around the corner, that'd be quite protected. Then that would be quite obvious he was an informant, wouldn't it? From your experience,
the Fair Play for Cuba Committee was a new thing, and the FBI just wasn't used to that. See, if you understand a bureaucracy, they get one thing and they stay with it, and you can't change their mind. So you have the Communist Party. Nobody else matters. You're talking to agents working the Communist Party, or the Social Workers Party, or whatever. These other little people on the side,
See, it seems strange, though, because if Oswald's a defector and he comes back, wouldn't an individual like that would be very high on the list of communist suspects, wouldn't they? I mean, the fact that you've defected to Russia and then you're back in the U.S., that wouldn't be ignored, would it? In these field offices,
it could be in the small offices that work generally criminal matters, because the agents who are working criminal matters, you mentioned security index to them, and they probably say, what? What's that? Now, if Oswald had come back to Chicago, that's a whole different
He would have come into your ballpark there,
yeah,
wouldn't he?
He would have fallen into my ballpark, and I would have done something. First thing would probably go to the manual to see if he qualifies for the security index, and whoever's controlling the security index probably would have said, no, he doesn't, because you have to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and he only has maybe 3 or 2, so he doesn't qualify. But he's important enough to pay attention to, but he doesn't get on the list. Well, that's the problem.
Well, that's a good point, Wes. How would actually that come to your attention? Say Oswald did, or whomever came back to your region office. How is the information given, passed on to that an individual of this nature, and where does the information come from? And then before you decide whether you should go on the index, where does it actually come emanating from?
Hopefully through informants.
Really? So so the street. So if Oswald comes back from Russia, relocates down to New Orleans or Dallas, Fort Worth, informants on the street around there would pick that up and relay that to the FBI contacts. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, it would be.
Okay. And so particular individuals. What types of field agents are they? These security agents who are a part of the FBI who are looking up individuals like that?
I was trying to compare New Orleans with Louisville, and there were only 2 agents in Louisville working security matters. So they're going to have a whole basket full of informants in order to pick up somebody like Oswald. Now, if Oswald went back to New York City, or he went to Chicago, or he went
Dallas?
to L.A.
Not big enough?
I don't think so. I don't know that there was much of a security index in Dallas.
Right. Just from the individuals you know, I know they never mentioned any of that.
No.
No. Okay. You
see
never
that-
thought that would be an interesting, just
Well,
out of curious mind that you have, that would be an interesting
What I
piece of information
what I
you'd like
thought
to know.
was funny when I first heard that. I think it was Hoover or somebody was saying, some high official saying that Oswald should have been on the security index, and I'm thinking, you don't have any idea the qualifications to be on a security index, and you're ranked maybe number 3 on the bureau level, and you don't know what the security index means.
Even on the reserve list, though, you had the second
or the reserve.
Yeah.
It's I don't know how to explain it. With some of these high officials, they get up and they apparently lose track of what the FBI was all about.
Which was?
Well, in the security field, every agent knows what the security index and what the qualifications are.
Right.
Because if you try to write a report and you want to recommend somebody for the security index and it goes into Washington and comes back, you're going to be very unhappy. You're not going to be fired or transferred, but you're going to be very unhappy because you obviously did not read the manual. It's about this thick on who qualifies for the security index and who doesn't.
Would you say someone like Jack Ruby out of Chicago would qualify to be on the security index?
No. He wouldn't even have one qualification. Now, if they
domestic, this is a foreign threat then. So what you're implying?
foreign counterintelligence threat.
Yeah, well, I've just said that.
Now, see, there might have
Foreign.
been an index for the top mafia people, but I don't know that they had that.
And that's a different department then?
Yeah,
Another
that yeah. See,
compartmentalized-
that would
another
be a whole different
compartmentalized-
division within the
Yeah.
field.
This Division 5. Now we're talking about divisions.
Mm-hmm.
How did that operate in regions, or was it centralized out of Washington, or would there be a Division 5 or Division 5 subsection either in New Orleans or Dallas or New York or Chicago?
Well, it would be division.
I mean, maybe you can tell the audience what exactly Division
it
5
would
is.
be, well, Division 5 was the intelligence division, what they called internal security. Now, some people might think internal security, that means internal police department investigation. No, and so they, after a few years, they realized that people were thinking internal security. No, that's wrong. We have to call it something else. So about the time I retired, they were calling it foreign counterintelligence, but it was internal security that related to the
Domestic.
United States.
All right, so those are domestic operations
Right.
internal to the United States.
Yes. Now, the bureau in Washington was divided into divisions, and Division 5 was the internal security.
Right. And how far do their tentacles reach into? I mean, would it cross into police departments?
No, it would only cross into the field offices. Now, like Chicago, we had, I think we had 5 security squads.
Right. And they're very compartmentalized, as you mentioned.
Right,
Yeah.
and the squads normally range between 20 and 25 agents, so that the supervisor can supervise them. Now, all 5 of those would report to Division 5.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Now, we could have had 7 squads. We'd still
Right.
report to Division
So was
5.
there an internal, to say, as an example, in the Chicago office, an internal liaison officer or individual who correlate that information to liaise with Division 5 in Washington from the 5 or 6 subsections
Well,
that you have
it
in
was
your...
compartmentalized.
Yeah.
The Chicago had two divisions. One was criminal, and one was security.
Yeah.
Now, the criminal division was headed by the agent in charge, although the agent in charge is also in charge of the security division. But in Chicago, the agent in charge was in charge of the criminal division because he's not going to be bothered with security. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
that's Mickey Mouse stuff. We had an assistant special agent in charge, an ASAC, and he was the top head of the 5 security squads in Chicago.
Right. And that would that model apply to Dallas as well? Do you think, from your understanding, similar model?
Well, I'm trying to compare Dallas with Louisville, Kentucky, because I've never been in Dallas. So there were only 2 agents in Louisville, and they would have been squeezed into another squad that was relatively